And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Bavona, joined alongside as always by my co-host Andrew Johnson. And Johnson, the 2025 NFL Draft has come and gone, and let's just say it was a very wild NFL Draft that we had this past, Thursday, Friday, and going into Saturday afternoon. The biggest storyline we know is a certain quarterbacks, probably historic, I don't know what the exact terminology you want to use for it. Drop, I guess. Yeah, landslide. I don't know. Like him fall, the way he fell in the draft, not something that we've seen probably ever in the draft. We've seen players fall in the draft. And, maybe they'll fall to the second or third round because of off the field issues or character issues or an injury, and that happened in this draft. Don't get me wrong, but this went from a guy that was at the preseason of the college football season being talked about being the number one overall pick, falling all the way to the fifth round, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. We'll recap some of the first round picks and some notable picks from day 2 and 3 as well as talking about our team's drafts entirely, your New England Patriots and my New York Giants. But yeah, this is a very interesting draft. A lot of media coverage surrounding this draft for that one big storyline, but as well for these 32 teams trying to, rebuild from last season, try to regroup and get into the 2025-2026 season and make sure they can win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think we can go straight into this, and we can talk about how these, the new homes for all these new draft picks.
Yeah, I guess let's start off with some of the picks that in the first round. We can recap what we did. We looked back at how we did it in our draft picks, and not bad, honestly. We got the first 3 picks correct. I think that was to be expected. There was a little bit of uncertainty around maybe pick 2 and 3, but the right players went where they were supposed to go. Some other players were in the exact region of where we took them, so not terribly. Couple of our other players either had downfalls in the draft or we just took them completely too high, so it is what it is. I think I mentioned it to you before we got on the air. Once you took one quarterback, I said, you know what? I'm going to go quarterback heavy as well. I'll try to take a quarterback for some of these teams that do need quarterback. And in fairness, those teams did take quarterback, but they waited till the second, third, and even fifth rounds later on in the draft. So let's take things off with how the draft started. We knew the number 1 pick was going to be Cam Ward from Miami. Great, college career in terms of being a 0-star recruit, coming all the way from Incarnate Ward, then going to Washington State, and in his career in Miami, and had a really good, successful career and outdueled Shedeur Sanders to be that number 1 overall quarterback taken at the time. And he goes to the Tennessee Titans, tries to now rebuild that franchise as a whole. We saw a big trade as well happen in that same division as the Cleveland Browns originally had the number 2 overall pick, but they traded down to number 5. They traded with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars trading the 5th overall pick, the 36th overall pick number 126, and a first-round pick in next year's draft. So a big gamble early for Jacksonville, who has a new GM this year. They, of course, would get the first number 2 overall pick as well as a 4th and a 6th in the draft. And they took Travis Hunter, who we expected to go number 2 overall, the unicorn-type player who was going to try to see if he could play both positions in the NFL. And I like the 5th for Jacksonville in this spot, Johnson, because those are 2 positions that they desperately needed. They needed a wide receiver and they needed a corner because they got rid of a bunch of players in this offseason. And it was a really good move by Jacksonville, maybe a risky move to trade a future first-round pick. But sometimes you have to take those gambles if you want to be better in the NFL. And for Jacksonville, they feel as if maybe the AFC South is wide open after the Titans have been bad the last couple of years. The Colts have been a middle of the pack team, and the Texans have won the division the last 2 years, but they did just unload a lot of players in the offseason, so they might be in for potential downgrading this upcoming season.
Yeah, lots to talk about there. I think the Texans will be absolutely fine, especially after this draft. I think they had a good draft.
It was a fine draft. They didn't have a first round
Jaguars,
pick. They traded out of it.
Yeah, but the Jaguars are really swinging for the fences here. They're really going all in here, especially because they traded up and they got Travis Hunter here. So
this is all about ticket sales if you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. And they had a chance to pair him with Shedeur Sanders, but you're not going to do that when you have so much money invested in Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, you can't. It would have been crazy if he went to Cleveland because, as we saw how the draft wound up going, there was a possibility that that connection could have reunited. But that was not to be the case. The rest of the top 10 as follows. Abdul Carter goes to the Giants at number 3. That was to be expected. Your New England Patriots took Will Campbell. I thought that was the right move. They needed to get some more protection for Drake May. And they got a nice running back in the second round that I would like to highlight in just a little bit. With the Browns trading down to pick 5, they took Mason Graham. That was the pick where everything maybe started to get everyone wondering what exactly Cleveland was going to do at pick 5 after the traded down. Mason Graham going into the draft was a top 5 player. His stock kind of fell down apparently going into the draft, but he still goes top 5 regardless. So that left the Las Vegas Raiders to get Ashton Genty, the star running back. He's going to be in an interesting style of system because he's going to be going into Vegas with Geno Smith at quarterback, but Chip Kelly is now the new OC with Vegas with Pete Carroll at the helm at the head coach. So basically going to be running a college style offense if you want to think about it in terms of running the football wise. So Genty does go into a nice spot, in my opinion, in Vegas. The Jets take Armand Membu from Missouri to try to bolster up that offensive line. Tenero McMillan goes to the Carolina Panthers, trying to get Bryce Young, a new number 1 wide receiver. The Saints were in an interesting spot. Would they have taken a quarterback at pick 9? Maybe a lot of people thought this is where Shedeur Sanders would go, but they instead go to the O-line and Kelvin Banks Jr. They would take a quarterback later in the draft, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And then rounding out the top 10, we have Colston Loveland. Surprisingly, the first tight end off the board. A lot of people thought it would be Tyler Warren, but Loveland from Michigan goes pick number 10 to the Bears to round out the top 10. Some other picks that I think, noticeable in the first round, we saw Tyler Warren fall to the Colts, which for Indianapolis, you got to love that pick, getting him at number 14, especially considering that he was the second tight end taken off of the board. We saw Emeka Egbuka going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They still have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, so a nice trio building with Tampa Bay. Jahdae Barron go to the Broncos to maybe have a nice 1-2 punch between him and Patrick Surtain Jr. A great combination there. Omari and Hampton going to the Chargers to become maybe a 1-2 punch with Najee Harris at the backfield. Matthew Golden made history this week because the Packers took him in the first round. The first time, and I have to get the right number, I think it was 23 years, they said.
It's 2002.
So the first time since 2002, the Packers had taken a wide receiver in the first round of the draft. They got it done, and coincidentally, the draft was held in Green Bay, so I guess it made sense for them to finally get that monkey off the back and finally take a wide receiver in the first round. Golden, the second receiver off the board. Technically third wide receiver because you have to count Travis Hunter. He goes to the Green Bay Packers. Then we saw some drama at the end of the first round. The Giants trading back up into the first round, which was a rumor that was heading into the draft, that if a certain quarterback was there for New York, that they would trade back up from their early second round pick and go into the late first round. That's exactly what they did. They traded with the Houston Texans, got pick number 25, and this is where the conversation started, Johnson. Would it be Jackson Dart? Would it be Shedeur Sanders? For my sake, hopefully not Tyler Shuck. No offense to him, but they went with Jackson Dart. Not Quinn Ewers. Not Quinn Ewers. God, no. I know for you wanted that, but Jackson
Dart. I will
Dart
push this agenda until I die.
He's on the Dolphins now, so I don't know how much you want to push that agenda anymore. But
nope, I'm done.
Yeah, we'll see about that. But the Giants do take Jackson Dart. He's the new quarterback in the helm. A very interesting quarterback room in New York. Going into the weekend, or maybe even going into day 3 of the draft, I think the Giants had one of the more interesting quarterback rooms in the NFL until what Cleveland did during this draft. So we'll talk about that in a few seconds. But the Giants get Jackson Dart. They don't necessarily have to start him immediately right off the bat. So I like that move as a Giants fan. Not the biggest fan of Jackson Dart, I will admit it, going into the draft. But yeah, if you could trade, if you don't have to, the Giants didn't really have to give up too much to get this pick in this round. They only traded pick 34, a conditional third round pick, and then they traded a third round pick next year. So I love the move for the Giants. Hopefully Jackson Dart fits what Brian Dable and company are looking for in a starting quarterback. The head scratching pick I had in the first round towards the end was Atlanta. And it's not necessarily because of the player that they got. James Pierce Jr. is a nice defensive edge that can help the Falcons, which is what they desperately need. But they had to trade a first-round pick to get him at the end of the first. They traded their first-round pick next year, a second-round pick number 46 in the 7th, to move up to pick number 26, and they got a third round pick in the draft as well that they traded later on in this one. So that was probably the only reason I had a head scratcher because of Atlanta doing that, giving up a first round pick, because they were kind of the same boat as Atlanta in terms, or excuse me, in Jacksonville, where you're taking a big gamble, try to try and trade your first round pick next year, and you necessarily don't see teams trading a first round pick for a late first round pick in the NFL draft just to move up. But that's what Atlanta did. They move up into the draft, they get James Pierce, and they better pray that he's going to be maybe like a Reggie White type of player out of Tennessee and bolsters up that Falcons defensive line, which is desperately needed. The other two picks I want to know, Johnson, that we saw were two players that fell in the first round, and they went to teams that usually find a way to get these players at the end of the first round. Malachi Starks from Georgia going to the Baltimore Ravens. How about that 1-2 combo of him and Kyle Hamilton at safety? Deadly combination for Baltimore as their secondary gets a huge upgrade there. And then the Eagles, they get Jahad Campbell at pick number 31. They moved up a couple picks with the Kansas City. They moved up a pick, I should say, to move up with the Chiefs to get him. They would try to move up earlier in the draft to get him as well. But Campbell falls into the lap of the Eagles because of his injury concerns going into this draft. And you could even see it on my face. You know, you and I were watching it in person, and I was having a good night. I like what the Giants were doing, and then the Eagles snatch up a player that I liked going into the draft. I wasn't expecting the Giants to take him, but it was a guy that I considered to be a top 15 player in this entire class, and he fell to the Eagles at 31. And then the Eagles would take a guy that I also like later on in the draft as well. But those are some of the notable picks from the first round. Other than that, the other picks that I really will talk about maybe will be I'll discuss it when we look at some of the team draft grades now in our next part of our segment. But anything you want to talk about before we head into that segment?
No, I think we can head into this segment. I'm going to start by saying I think the Seahawks had an excellent draft.
Yeah, I don't think if you're a Seahawks fan, you have to be very excited
Because
what
they're
you did
building
in this
towards the
draft.
future. Like they got some pieces that can
Right.
be complementary right now. Like listen, they got Gray Zabel, which immediately addresses the offensive line issues. You got a great safety. And now they're also building towards the future. Now I thought they were going to take Shador Sanders, but they take Jalen Milrow here.
Yeah.
Um, his college style is very similar to Gino's college style. Very, very similar. So I could see him being a perfect mentor for Jalen. And this is gonna sound crazy. I could see him starting by the end of next season.
I think it's going to come down to his arm talent because you know he's a good athlete, right? But the problem he's always had has been his accuracy. That was the issue he had at Bama. If they're able to fix his accuracy issues going into next season, and like you said, they don't even have to start him off the bat because they have Sam Darnold signed under that contract for the next 3 years. So he necessarily might not even have to start the first 2 years. He could be a guy that at year three, if Darnold starts to struggle in his contract year, look at that. You have Jalen Milrow to try to experiment around with and try to see if maybe he is the next guy for you at the quarterback position. But
Yeah, I know. I said. I know. I said Gino. I keep on thinking Gino's on Seattle. It's Sam Darnold now. Thank you
Sam
for
Darnold,
correcting me on
yes.
that. Yeah, I mean it's
Um,
still a great insurance policy, Bill.
the pick that I love for Seattle, Nick Amanawari, the safety out of South Carolina, a guy that if Malachi Starks didn't go to Baltimore, if he was taken earlier in the draft, Baltimore would have probably taken him in the end of the first round. He falls to the early second round, and he is a great talent. He's a really strong safety. Could maybe even play linebacker if needed for Seattle. He kind of fits what the Legion of Boom were back in the early 2010s. Like this is a type of style player that Seattle would have loved to had when they had Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and all those guys back in the early 2010s. And they got Elijah Awario, the tight end from Miami, to basically be the next guy to replace Noah Fant once his contract ends with this team. Yeah, I love what Seattle did. Seattle had a very good draft. If you look at some of the draft grades from multiple sites, that everyone as well liked the Seattle Seahawks draft grade. So you have to give their tip of the cap. They did a really good, strong draft in this one. And I think another team that I don't know how much you want to talk about them, but I would like to discuss about what they did. I know you're not a fan of them, but I like what the Jets did in the draft as well. I think they did a really good job of establishing a lot of things in this one. They got a good tackle in Membu that could hopefully help them with their new quarterback, Justin Fields. Mason Taylor, one of the best tight ends in the entire nation college last season. falls to the second round, the Jets get him at pick number 42. They desperately needed a tight end. Arian Smith is a very fast wide receiver out of Georgia. They got Malachi Moore, the safety out of Alabama, that I think could be maybe a day 3 type of steal for the Jets if he does pan out with New York. And Azareye'h Thomas, the corner out of Florida State, is a very solid corner as well. Could maybe play some slot and nickel for the Jets this upcoming season. Could easily be a starter for the Jets coming up in the 2025 season. So I like what the Jets did as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about. Listen, the Jets are the Jets, but I want to talk about this. May be a little controversial. The Raiders, I think, had a terrible draft, and if it wasn't for Ashton Genty propping up that draft, I think they'd have one of the worst draft classes here.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't know about the
took
Raiders.
multiple FCS players and FCS players that weren't supposed to go in these positions. They passed up on Shador, which this is where I have myself confused. Which he should have been learning under Gino because Gino only has a certain amount of time. Do you really think Tommy Miller from Tommy Miller, Cam Miller from North Dakota State is going to pan out and learn under Gino?
No, I mean them not drafting a quarterback tells you that they're waiting until next year to draft a quarterback. That's essentially
crazy
what it
because
is.
they're pretty much admitting to tanking right now. That's pretty much what they're doing. They're not prepping for the future. They're just assuming they're going to be in the race for Arch next year.
Yeah, I think they had a very up and down draft. Genty, of course, makes this draft look great on paper. I like Jack Beck out of TCU. I don't know how he'll pan out with this team. They got
and
offensive line as well. I think that they're one of those middle pack, one of those middle of the pack teams in terms of will this draft turn well or will it turn bad? I don't think we're necessarily going to know off the rip. And again, remember, you can't really necessarily know how a draft's going to go just basing it off of what players they took and how they look on paper. It all comes down to how they're going to produce on the field. Right now, the Raiders, it's going to come down to how these guys will develop. I don't mind their draft. I think there were worse drafts than them personally for me, but their draft was maybe undesirable for some people. But I think Genty was the right pick, at least at pick 6 for them.
It was the right pick.
Game last season. That they were probably, in my opinion, the worst rushing team in the NFL. They probably were based off of stats as well. But I didn't like. They needed a running back desperately.
So I want to talk about Shador here just a little bit. If Cam Ward and Shador were supposedly 1A, 1B all year, consensus from every draft board, from every NFL expert, from members of the media to fans, to owners, GMs, players, whatever. If every consensus 1A, 1B, and you can let Shador fall because of attitude issues for 140 plus picks, is Tennessee justified in taking Cam Ward? Because if Cam Ward's talent and his attitude is enough to get drafted number 1 overall, I highly doubt Shador. Because I think about Johnny Manziel, right? No one had worse off the field issues than him.
Baker Mayfield too.
In the first round. Baker too.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think
you're right.
If you're going to sit here and tell me that the talent gap isn't really too big between Cam Ward and Shador Sanders all year up until an hour before the draft starts, even during the draft, you're saying in the first round the talent gap's not that big. I think Tennessee is either the smartest team in the room because they got Cam Ward, right? Yeah. And the other 31 teams are absolute morons for letting someone that is a first round or number 1, number 2 overall quarterback fall past them for multiple rounds.
So let me break down the quarterbacks that went ahead of him, and decide if I think that was the right move, in my opinion. Cam Ward at 1, I think, made the most sense. He had a very good end to his career. He's more of the prototypical quarterback that could start off the bat. Not saying Shador can't start off the bat, but there's still some concerns with his accuracy and him holding the ball too long and taking sacks. That's a big reason maybe why his draft stock fell a little bit. Shouldn't have fallen that much. I agree with you on that. Then you go into Jackson Dart, and that was the first time in the draft where you had the conversation: is this going to be Shador or is this going to be another quarterback? And then it was Jackson Dart. And the reason I think the Giants took Jackson Dart, because he fits what Brian Daboll wants in the system. He's kind of like they're hoping he could be what Josh Allen was in terms of a project type quarterback that you can build to be a superstar type level quarterback in the next couple of seasons. And he fits kind of what Brian Dable and company want. He's a guy that can run the ball as well, can take some hits, and can make some throws with his arm. So that's I think why they took him there. Now, going to your point, the maybe, again, everyone was saying maybe it's Dart, maybe it's Sanders in that pick. After that is where I thought maybe it was getting a little bit crazy because then Tyler Shuck goes to New Orleans in the second round. That's where I said to myself, okay, if he doesn't go here, then he could be in for another very long night after not going in the first round. And then they took Shuck, who, let's face it, he's 25, 26 years old already, I think. I don't remember his exact age off the top of my head. But the Saints are in this position where they're not going to have Derek Carr this season. He's probably going to be out for the entirety of the year. So whoever they took at this pick is either going to be starting or is going to be competing with Spencer Rattler to be the starter this upcoming year. And I don't see why they wouldn't take a flyer on Sanders. At least if he works out, then you have your franchise quarterback for years and years to come. They took Tyler Shuck, which might work out, but he's not going to have much longevity considering he's already 26 years of age. He played 7 years in college coming out of the draft. So that's where everything started to go worry. I agreed with you then. I thought New Orleans was crazy for making that pick. I was praying that for Shador's sake that he would just go there at least, because at least you go there and it's not the worst, drop off from where you were originally supposed to be picked. Then you go to the third round. You see Jalen Milroe get taken by Seattle. I can maybe get what they're trying to do. I don't. I think the whole thing is they want to commit to Sam Darnold right now. They don't want to put any pressure on him with getting a guy like Shador. So maybe I can understand that. And then the Cleveland takes Dylan Gabriel in the third round, and there was no talks. In my opinion, at least I didn't see anything about this. I didn't see one thing about Dylan Gabriel going in the first 3 rounds of the draft. I thought maybe a 4th round pick. If you want to consider a 4th round pick, it's late third, sure. But then Cleveland takes him, and then came down to in the 5th round, he's still there at pick, what was it, 144, 145? And
144.
They said, listen, like, he's still here. We might as well just take him. Like, what's the harm? And they did. They took him. They traded up to get him because the Eagles were probably about to do it to pick before them, or the pick after them, I should say. So the Browns traded up to get him. He was the 6th quarterback taken off the board. And I mentioned the quarterback room for Cleveland earlier. They have to have one of the weirdest quarterback rooms, maybe in NFL history, because you have Deshaun Watson, who's going to be out for he's going to be out for the season again because of an injury. You have Joe Flacco back after a year off with the Colts. You have Kenny Pickett, who you just traded for this offseason from the Philadelphia Eagles. And then you just drafted 2 quarterbacks in Dylan Gabriel and Shador Sanders. Outside of that, that weird combination of those 2 quarterback picks, Johnson, I actually liked what the Browns did in the draft, though. Crazy to think that, because they got a first-round pick in next year's draft. I really liked Mason Graham. I think he's going to be a really good defensive tackle in the NFL. Then they got Quinshawn Junkins in the 2nd round, which I love.
That was a steal.
You guys talk about you being the New England Patriots for your team. I like Travion Henderson. If I had to pick between him and Junkins, I think Junkins was just slightly better, but you couldn't really go wrong with either running back. For them to get him in the 2nd, that's great value for Cleveland, considering that they don't have Nick Chubb anymore. They let him walk in free agency. Harold Fannin Jr., I think could be a really big steal in the 3rd round for a tight end. I don't know what the situation is with David Njoku for the team. I'm assuming that they're not going well in terms of contract negotiations. A local kid from Bowling Green, why not? Take him at tight end. He could be a future tight. He probably could have been the Mackey Award winner for tight end last season. That's how good he was for Bowling Green. And we know how Bowling Green is. They're not synonymously known for football. They're not synonymously known for a lot of things in sports. But he was a really good tight end. And then they were able to get Dylan Gabriel. I love Dylan Sampson as well. Like, you get him and Junkins, that's a nice 1-2 combo. And then they got Shador. They pulled something off that never happened in draft history in the modern era. They drafted 2 running backs and 2 quarterbacks in the first 5 rounds. That never happened in the NFL draft era. And that's exactly what they did. But again, I still like what they did. I call me crazy. A lot of people don't like what they did. I think getting all of these players, again, it has to work out at the end, but getting all these guys and getting a first round pick could benefit them. The only thing that might come back to backfire against them is that they gave up. They didn't want to get Travis Hunter. They could have gotten him at 2, and they said, you know what? We'll take our chances and move down the draft, get an extra first round pick, get Mason Graham, and we'll see how the rest of our draft goes.
So I want to just touch upon the 2026 NFL draft because according to Tankathon.com, they have the number one overall team, or I guess the worst team next year
Probably
being.
the Giants.
No, Giants are 4.
Yeah, okay.
Patriots are 10. Browns are number 1. So they're expecting the Browns to have the worst season. And they have a mock taking
I could
Arch
see
Manning.
that happening, yeah.
So do you think that this is going to sound crazy because this, again, we're thinking towards next year that the top 5 teams they're thinking are going to be the worst in the league. Cleveland,
Cleveland,
Tennessee, New
Tennessee.
Orleans,
Yeah.
Jets, Giants. Now it makes sense for the Jets to take a quarterback here, right? But these
Yeah,
other
because
4
you're not
teams that
committed to
have
Justin Fields
quarterbacks,
too.
right?
Right. They're only committed to him for 2
These other
years, so they're not committed fully.
these other 4 teams that they're projecting to draft in the top 4 next year. Would it be crazy for any of these teams to take Arch next year, number 1 overall?
The Titans won't do it because we just saw them take Cam Ward. It would have to be catastrophic for them to take a quarterback in the next draft.
So Titans
Cleveland,
won't do it.
Cleveland. I don't know. I don't
Would
think
you
they
put it past
will.
them?
You can't. No, I wouldn't put it past it because we know their track history in terms of quarterbacks. But I think you would like to see how at least one of Gabriel or Shador works out because you have to believe that those are the 2 guys you're trying to build your future off of. So I don't necessarily know if you should take a quarterback at number 1. And again, we don't even know if Arch is going to be the guy next year. He might not have. He might not. He might stay another year in Texas. It all comes down to how he's going to do next season. He might not even be number 1 quarterback. It could be Nussmeier. I've heard a lot of rumors that Nussmeier could be the first quarterback off the board next season. The rest of the draft, if I'm looking at the top 10 as a whole, Cleveland, it's a coin flip. Tennessee, no. The Saints absolutely need a quarterback. They definitely would take one. Chuck's not going to be the guy next season for them. In my opinion, I don't see it happening. The Giants, I think they're going to want to invest in Jackson Dart, especially considering they traded up to get him. So they're not going to take a quarterback. The Jets would be in the market. Carolina, watch out for them because if Bryce Young has a bad year this year, they're going to be in the market next season for a quarterback.
I would believe in that. Yeah.
The Colts, they're a team to look out for as well because if Anthony Richardson has a bad year, they'll be in the quarterback market. And the Raiders, we know for a fact they're going to be in the quarterback market as well. And there's a sneaky team before I didn't mean to cut you off. There's one sneaky team. It's the Rams because now again the Falcons pick. The Rams could be in the market because they have Matthew Stafford signed for now, but they're going to need a contingency plan afterwards. So look out for them as well.
So yeah, I want to touch upon a couple of these statements here. It would be kind of insane, but
and of course the Steelers.
I know Eli was pretty. I mean, they were famous for not wanting to go to San Diego, right? He forced his way to New York. You think Arch will have the same type of, again, if he's going to be a consensus number 1 over a quarterback? We're a year away from this. We have like 8 months worth of games.
Yeah, if he decides to declare one, and then
he's consensus, do you think he has the pull to say, "Hey, I'm not going to Cleveland. Trade me"?
I think if he has like an all-out spectacular season for Texas this year, yeah, I don't see why he wouldn't. I don't see how he couldn't get it because let's be real, like we've seen it not only with Eli, John Elway also did it too. Bo Jackson did it as well. These guys didn't want to play for these teams, and they said, you know what? I'm just going to either go back to college or you're just going to trade me and get me to a team that I actually want to play for. In hindsight, I really think the Saints are going to be the team that's picking number 1, and we know that the family's history with the Saints, they would be okay with him going to New Orleans.
Yeah, I'm saying New Orleans would be fine. I think, obviously, they'd be okay in New Orleans. They'd be okay with the Giants. Cleveland's a no. Tennessee's a no.
Yeah. I mean, listen, even Dion said years ago that he even said this about Shador. He said, I would not want my son to play for Cleveland. Now his son's playing for Cleveland. So I don't really, and I guess like it's different because maybe if it was a first round pick, then maybe you're like trying to pull the leverage and say, no, I'm not playing. Because you fell to the 5th round, I think you have no choice but to just say, all right, I'm going to have to stick it out and play here for a year or 2 or whatever it is, how long it's going to go. But for Arch, I mean, listen, it all depends on how he does this season. If he has a really good, strong year at Texas, he will be the number one quarterback taken. If he kind of plays middle of the pack, where he's like an all right quarterback, he might not even be the first quarterback taken. It might be Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. I think out of the three, because it's him, Drew Aller, and Nussmeier. Nussmeier could very well be the first quarterback taken in the draft because we just thought about it last year, as I mentioned earlier. We thought Shador was the clear cut guy to get taken number one heading into this draft, going into the college football season, and he wasn't even one of the top five quarterbacks
It
taken.
wasn't
He was
even
number six.
QB5. Yeah.
This all could change depending on how the season goes, and also, of course, how the NFL season goes in terms of who's going to be picking number one. If I had to guess right now, I think it's New Orleans, just because of all the injuries they have going on right now, and their offense is kind of undesirable right now for me. So I don't know. And I'm sure Kellen Moore would like to at least have a contingency quarterback for the long term, with him being the new head coach.
You know, just something to think about. So it's
Yeah,
food for thought because we talk about all these quarterbacks and how this is supposed to be a quarterback filled draft. But it seems like a lot of these teams are at least going to be temporarily married to these quarterbacks because I don't know, man. It's gonna be weird if you think it's gonna be almost like wasted draft picks to a
yeah.
lot of these
You're
franchises.
trying not to pull an Arizona Cardinal where you draft Josh Rosen, you're hoping that things go well, and then you have a one-win season, and you're like, well, I'm picking number one, so oh well, to my first round quarterback from last season, I'm taking another first round quarterback for pick number one and taking Kyler Murray. Like you don't want that to happen. That's
Hindsight's
what the
always
Giants are in.
2020,
Like
but that was the right move.
they got to pray that Cam Ward doesn't suck. I don't think they would take a quarterback even if he does suck. Like it's the number one pick of the draft. You can't.
I don't know.
You're
It could, like you said,
you're
it could be
invested.
Josh Rosen 2.0.
Yeah, but I think it's a difference of pick number 10 in that scenario to pick number one. Like you're paying the
I
most money
think
out of all the
I'll
first
be
round
real with
draft
you.
picks.
I think teams don't care about optics anymore because look what's happened in Carolina. 18 games in his career, Bryce Young got benched.
That's true.
So
That's
like, I don't
true.
think teams care about optics anymore. There's no more. Oh, you sit for a year and then you play
Yeah.
a season. If
I
you weren't
mean,
that good, we have all next year. And if not,
right.
you're in a make or break year, and then that's it. Like they don't give you time anymore. You have pretty much 20 games from pretty much the second you step on the in the practice facility to start producing winning football. If you're not producing winning football within 18 months of you
Like
being drafted, you're already being
right.
drafted over.
Like the Giants, I said probably don't do it because they just got Dart. But if they get a new head coach and GM in the offseason, like if things go wrong this season, they might just say, screw it. New head coach and new GM. They might just be in the quarterback market and say, forget Jackson Dart. I don't want that to happen. I would rather see it play out. But that could happen. Like it's not out of the realm of possibility. Like there's so many different scenarios that you could talk about. And with Cleveland, like you want Shador Gabriel, one of those guys, to be maybe your future quarterback, but you might have two potential top 10 picks next year because you might have a bad year, but you also have the Jaguars pick. And if they go bad again this season, you're going to have another top 10 pick as well. So you might be tempted to do it. So I don't know. But uh, before we wrap it up, why don't we talk about our team's drafts and
Absolutely.
what we liked about it and what our outlook is going into this upcoming preseason in a couple months. So why don't you start off with your Patriots?
Yeah, I mean, I said I want Genti, and I wouldn't be mad if it was Will Campbell. So I'm not mad it's Will Campbell. If you take, he's clearly very high character, and he's going to fit in New England well. He scream, and again, everyone makes this jokey, but he screams a lineman that starts for 12 years and has 12 Pro Bowls. Uh,
Right.
just his dedication. You see his composure, how he handled himself. Not only at the draft, but in post game interviews last year and during other media interviews. So he's clearly kind of built for this moment. And if you look at his tape, he's fantastic. I like Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, even though I don't like the school. I think he's a great player, and I hope he's playing winning football. We ended up getting a wide receiver, Kyle Williams, out of Washington State, which I will admit I really didn't know much about him because I was only focused on his.
He's very solid
Yeah,
outside wide
yeah. I
receiver that
mean,
could be like a one-on-one type guy when you
yeah.
jump ball.
Obviously, now that I looked a little bit more into him, because Washington State, unfortunately, they're not really playing big time football anymore. It's
No.
yeah.
Still
So
looking for some conference mates.
yeah, still looking for some conference. Which I think are they joining the new Pac-12, right?
They're still well. They were technically still in the Pac-12. They're just looking for
Yeah,
teams to
yeah,
join it, and I know they
yeah.
got
So I
some
think
Mountain
they
West
get.
teams,
I know they're getting Fresno State and San Diego State and
Boise too,
Boise
right?
State. So
Yeah,
they're getting a couple decent teams. I know Gonzaga's being there for basketball. Anyway, I digress.
yeah,
Uh, Again, you have mainly defense all through picks 100 to 257, which is what the Patriots kind of need a little bit. They need a little depth up there. They need more offensive line than anything. So they got a couple offensive linemen in the draft, and really only
got got a
those
kicker
two
as well.
weapons. Yeah, I mean, again,
At least
I'm
hopefully it
not gonna
works
sit here
out.
and know. Yeah, I'm not gonna say here. I know kicker. Like I'm studying. Oh, this is the top
I
kicker in the
mean,
draft. I have no idea. But listen, he
yeah,
played at Miami. He was pretty decent there. And if he warrants a draft pick, sure, you're not picking. It's not like you're Bill Belichick pick
yeah.
him in the third round.
It's a sixth round pick. Like you obviously hope it pans out, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
no,
liked what New England did in the draft. I think that was the right approach. I like obviously Genty would be the sexy pick at 4, but to get Campbell and then get a guy like Travion Henderson in the second round, obviously, in my opinion, I think that's a way better combination because there was more running back depth in the draft compared to tackle depth. That in terms of being really good compared to being all right, he's solid enough. We'll see how he is in the next couple of years. Like Campbell is an immediate starter for you, and you could make the case that Trevion Henderson could be an immediate starter as well. He'll probably have to work his way into that starting lineup with Ramondre Stevenson, but I think he could be a future starter for you guys as well. And Kyle Williams, as I mentioned, is kind of like that one-on-one guy that can make some jump ball catches and make a big play down the field. So I like that pick. The whole purpose of this draft for New England is to make sure Drake May is in the best position possible for the next couple of years. And I think they're doing a good job of doing that right now. I think that's exactly what they need to do, and they have to just continue to do that for the next couple of years. You have to build and invest in your young quarterback. So I like the approach that New England's been doing the last couple of seasons, and I think this was another good approach this year. And for my team, the Giants, I mean, I try to always be, you know, be on the caution side of optimistic and stuff. I really love what the Giants did in this draft. I'm trying to pray because I know in years past, obviously the year where we got Kayvon and Evan Neal, I was ecstatic with how that draft went, and then we know how that's turned out so far. Um, so I'm trying to be optimistic with this draft. I'm not saying like this is the best draft ever, but this is a really solid draft on paper that I hope will work out in the years coming up. Abdul Carter arguably was the best player in the draft, maybe the second best player behind Travis Hunter. They get him at pick number 3. Will definitely help the the team that was struggling last season in terms of rush defense. They got to the quarterback a lot, but they need to fix that run defense, and Carter could potentially do that on this defensive line. I mentioned they traded up for Jackson Dart. We'll have to see how that works out. I think it will work under Dable as long as Dable is still at the helm of as the quarterback, not quarterback, the head coach for the next couple of seasons. So we'll see. They don't have to start immediately with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston there, so I think that'll be fine. Darius Alexander from Toledo, I thought was a nice pick in the third round. Had a 70-yard pick six for a defensive tackle in their bowl game to end the year. So he's, as I mentioned, he's one of those guys that can help the Giants in terms of run stopper defense, which is what they desperately need. So I like that pick in the third round. The pick that I love the most, Johnson, it's a guy that you and I really like, Cam Scottaboo. I was ecstatic when the Giants took him in the fourth round. This is the pick that I loved even more than Abdul Carter, which is a crazy statement to say, but adding him with Tyrone Tracy could give the Giants the 1-2 combo that they've been desperately searching since they had Ahmad Bradshaw and Brandon Jacobs back in the early 2000s. I think it's a
You're the
great.
second person to tell me that this weekend, by the way.
Listen. I think it really could. I think it really could pay off. Scatterboo was a jack of all trades last year for Arizona State. We saw what he did in the college football playoff. Nearly, basically, won Arizona State that entire game against Texas. And the Giants get to add him into this draft. And you and I are both wrestling fans. He's nicknamed the Nature Boy, so I like that. I like the nice little WWE tie to it as well. So I was very happy to get him in the fourth. And then Marcus Bowe from Purdue, the offensive tackle, they got him in the fifth round. They were projected him to go in the third round initially, but an injury forced him to go into the fifth, and they got him in that fifth round. He could immediately become a starting offensive tackle or guard for the Giants going into this upcoming season. So I really, really liked what New York did. I'm hoping that it all pans out. As I mentioned, I'm not saying that it's the best draft ever. I'm saying it's a good draft. Now let's see if it works out in the end, because I don't want to be where I was a few years ago where I said, wow, we got Kayvon and Evan Neal with our two top 10 picks. We're going to be in a great position in a few years to make a couple playoff appearances and hopefully go further than that. So I'll be optimistic for now, but I like what my team did in the draft this past weekend.
And I think that's gonna really wrap it up, Nick. Unless you have more to add here, I'm tapped out.
Yeah, I think other than that, everyone, I think the only other thing realistically is, we'll see now how all this pans out for some of these teams. Um, again, you can't really go judge off of what, like, we look at some of the draft grades when we do our shows, like after the draft ends, and we look at and we see these people ranking it and saying, oh, this team had a really good draft on paper. We don't know how it's going to necessarily turn out, folks. Like, you could have the worst draft on paper. Like, for example, I think San Francisco and Minnesota have been getting the worst grades after this past weekend. They very well could have a really good draft in 3 or 4 years' time if it all pans out for them. So we necessarily don't know how these guys are going to work out. Every team is obviously optimistic that it will work out going into 2 or 3 years from now. But this draft had a lot of controversy for more reasons than one, and now it's time to see if this draft will pay off, because there was a lot of people saying that this going into this one that maybe this is a as bad of a draft class as it was back when Eric Fisher and Luke Jokel were the first two picks in the 2013 draft. I think the year was. I didn't agree with that scenario, because just look at Travis Hunter alone. That immediately beats whatever happened in that class. Um, so I think from a couple years from now, you're going to look at this draft and say, "Wow, this draft was heavily criticized, but there's so much value that came out of it that makes it a really good draft class for a bunch of teams that were in desperate need of certain positions." And at the end of the day, these teams got the positions they needed the most. Guys like Hunter, Carter, Campbell, Cam Ward, maybe Genty. Like, you have so many good players. We talked about Will Johnson too. I love what the Cardinals did as well in the draft, getting him in the second round. Like, that's huge value for Arizona and even Baltimore. You and I talked about Mike Green from Marshall. He had some off the field issues, but Baltimore got him in the second round of the draft. So they might have had two good, solid picks from guys that were both considered to be early first round picks after what happened during the combine, as well as the Senior Bowl, and then after the regular season. So we'll have to see how it all goes, but I'm looking forward to the 2025-2026 season for the NFL. I know you and I are looking forward to it as well. And for us, it's still busy time here in the summer of 2025 because we still have the NBA playoffs going on. So once our first round of the playoffs action ends, you and I will be recapping the first round and previewing the second round of the NBA postseason. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. The NFL draft has come and gone. Who do you think had the best NFL draft this past weekend? A lot of good teams had some good drafts compared to from what people have said. Some teams have had some really not good drafts. So tell us who you think had the best draft after this weekend, and we'll see if we agree with you or not on that stance. But as I mentioned, we'll be talking about the NBA postseason when the first round action ends. A couple teams have already moved on. We're still waiting to see who the next couple teams will move on. Hopefully for Johnson and I, our New York Knicks move on. They will try to clinch their first round action tonight as of this recording on April 29th. Go Knicks, and we'll see if they move on into the second round of the NBA postseason. But as for the NFL, we'll see it back in the summer when we preview this 2025-2026 season. This has been Nicholas Pavono, joined alongside by my co-host Andrew Johnson for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your weekend.